morning, Bill. Good morning, Bill. Good morning, Paul. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to wait a few moments as the stream is getting going to make sure that we're going out live. I think we're there now. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all around the world. I'm glad that you could join us today for the latest LinkedIn Live event from MIT Sloan Executive Education. I'm Peter Hirst, Senior Associate Dean for Executive Education at MIT Sloan School, and I am thrilled to be joined today by two colleagues, Bill Aulet, who is the Managing Director and Professor of Practice at Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, and I get an extra gold star for getting the name correct. Look at that, rah-rah from Bill. And also with Paul Cheek, who is the Executive Director and a Senior Lecturer in the MIT Trust Center for Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship. I got there in the end. And it's a real thrill to be joined by these two individuals, not only because they are great colleagues as faculty now who really are pioneering the teaching of entrepreneurship here at MIT and in the world. They are both fully fledged entrepreneurs in their own right, and I'm hoping that we might learn a little bit more from them about their journey to join us here at this moment in time, and then we'll get on to talk about their approach to teaching entrepreneurship here at MIT, and in particular how they work with us in executive education to create entrepreneurship training for more seasoned executives and managers. And that seems like an oxymoron to me, but we'll delve into that as the conversation goes on. But as we get going, please do, as you're already doing, it's great in the comments to tell say hello, tell us where you're from, and feel free to ask any questions that you'd like me to put to Bill and to Paul as the hour progresses. But in the meantime, in sort of time-honored tradition, what I'd actually like to do is hand over to Bill and to Paul to introduce themselves a bit more by answering the question. Just give us your elevator pitch. We all know that 60 seconds for what brought you to this moment at MIT. Let's go with you first, Bill.
Yeah, so I'm I say an accidental professor. I'm an entrepreneur by design. I think entrepreneurship is the most powerful force in the world, and it's more important now than ever. We should be proud to be entrepreneurs. It's never been a better time to start to become an entrepreneur, and that the world needs it more than ever. And all the current events, as we're going to talk about, point to that. And not only is it a great time to be an entrepreneur now, it will be more so as we go forward. So, Peter, I'm a guy from New York who only knows two things: basketball and entrepreneurship. And somehow MIT made a mistake and let me through the door, and I've become an accidental academic here. But I'm really an entrepreneur bigot, I would say. Not a bigot, an entrepreneur snob. I think entrepreneurs are awesome.
Great, thank you, Bill. And what about you, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Peter. And note that Bill does still play basketball. So I'm an entrepreneur. My roots are in software engineering, and I discovered how much I love building something from 0 to 1, from the ground up. And I've learned that through building a number of companies, going through the process over and over again, the most recent of which is called OceanWorks, where we sell recycled ocean plastic to brands that want to make more sustainable products around the world. And from my companies, I bring that into the classroom here at MIT and in developing our curriculum, working with students, providing them real world examples rooted in the first principles and the foundations of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education. But we always say this, entrepreneurship is a game I love. And that's why I'm here.
That's great. I was just interested, looking back at both of your resumes a little bit. You've each got it looks like 3 or 4 companies that you've founded or been involved in the founding of. Is there kind of a magic number there for each of you that, just in terms of being serial entrepreneurs?
Well, let me just go first, Paul. I find it mind-boggling when people say, I started 16 companies. I mean, it's impossible to start. I mean, well, you can start 16 companies. That's about all you can do. The point is, you can't just start companies, you have to grow And so I find it very hard to believe when the number gets into double digits. I just find that implausible. I worked at IBM for 11 years, but then I did 3 companies. And by the end of the third one, Peter, I was exhausted. It's very hard to take a company from 0 to 55 miles per hour. And it is not easy. And it takes a good 5 or 6 years to do that. And it's total immersion to do that. So, I mean, I think that an entrepreneur is not someone who just gets a company started. An entrepreneur is someone who takes sees a problem, sees a challenge, and then takes that through to scale to have a really positive impact on the world. And to me, that takes a while. It's not just like it's like popcorn, you're popping companies off. So I've never been asked that question before, Peter. That's very impressive for someone from Wales. I'm really impressed. But it's a good question. And by the way, we won't mention the World Cup here. Well,
yeah, from my perspective, there's no magic number here. And I completely agree with Bill. But, Peter, if we look at a resume, you're not going to see the ones that didn't work out, right? Entrepreneurship is a hard game. We're going to talk a little bit more about the statistics of what you can expect from success in entrepreneurs and new companies. I think we'll probably touch on that a little bit later and some of the statistics we have from the companies that come through the Trust Center. But, they don't all work out. And some of them do very well and have a very positive impact on the world. But the number one thing is getting started and going and building that first one. That first one might not work out, but you learn the process and you go and you do it over and over and over again, because each time you get better. And I can say that for sure with myself. Some of the early products that I built, oh my gosh, years and years ago, I don't know that those solved the biggest problem in the world, but it led me down the path of learning the process, the entrepreneurial process, to go and do it right and have that impact in the world. So, I think
Great.
the number doesn't necessarily matter.
I think that
you both said something interesting there as well about. Say that again.
Paul brought up a really good point. I just want to say quickly here. Yeah. If you think you're going to control this, Peter, just realize it's very difficult to control one entrepreneur, let alone 2. But we had this class yesterday with these top undergraduates from MIT wanting to be entrepreneurs, and they're wrestling with it. They're all first years, and they're like, what do I do? How do I get this right? How do I do it? And Paul brought up this point. It's like, I want all of you to think of what's going to be your hello world. And like when you're writing program, your first program is not meant to be a successful program. You just write something to put out to the screen, hello world. And I thought that was a really insightful thing. It's like entrepreneurship is not like a singular destination. As someone said, it's not a recipe. It's just this like iterative process that you get better and better. And by the way,
first pancake, Bill, we always talk about the first pancake, right? The first pancake, what do you do with it? You throw it out by design, but you get better and better. And each subsequent pancake, well, at some point becomes edible, right? And that's the point of the process.
By the way, I love this chat here. People are coming in from all over the world. This is the beauty of the MIT platform, and also just being able to go virtual. Super. I can't, apparently they won't let me put anything in there in the chat, the comments, but know that we see you all out there from all over the world. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I'm pleased thanks for that, Bill. And please do put any questions through the chat, which I'm keeping an eye on, and I'll be happy to share with Bill and Paul as well. But just building on what you both just said there, you talked about getting started, and both of you, I think, started from sort of already a position in the corporate world, whereas you were just giving examples of people that you come across every day at MIT who are kind of getting started, right out of university, right out, that's sort of like their first job is being an entrepreneur oftentimes. Could you compare and contrast that a little bit? What's the difference between someone getting started, when they're a bit more further into their career than someone who's just coming right out of college?
Yeah, and I'm happy to start on that one, Bill, and I'll pass it over to you. You think about it, you're in a corporate role and you say, oh, I want to go start a business. That introduces some level of risk, right? Because you're going to give up that steady paycheck. But we always talk about this, and Bill, this is something we talk about a lot, right? Is it risky or is it measured risk, right? Can we do things to improve those odds of success? And Peter, I know we've talked about this as well, right? There's a lot that we can do to improve the odds of success by taking the really systematic approach to entrepreneurship, where we know exactly what level of risk we're taking. But there's also a huge advantage of doing this coming out of a corporate environment, in that, you've been immersed in a business that likely has tons of problems, right? You look around you and you see problems probably everywhere in some fashion. And that's a huge opportunity. If you can identify those problems around you and say, I'm going to take a systematic approach to going and building a new venture to solve those problems, you may potentially have your first customer already lined up. And that's a huge advantage. Bill?
Yeah, I think this just raises another issue. I'm going to take it a different direction. Is, I always find it, helpful but frustrating when people give advice. Even myself, it's like, well, you should go to corporate and then you should come out. For me, that was right. I went to IBM and I worked for 11 years and I learned how to manage people and I learned how organizations work and I learned a whole bunch finance and a whole bunch of stuff. And that was when I was, but I'm over 60 years old now. And when I first entered the workforce, electricity had just been invented, as far as it. But today's world is different. And we can get into this, just in the past week, if everyone here hasn't gotten on to see Chat GPT, you got to go on and check this out. It is changing the world right in front of our eyes. The future is here. And I think the thing about entrepreneurship is it's so dynamic and it's always changing. And while there are first principles, you have to question everything. And there's a great book called That Will Never Work by the co-founder of Netflix named Mark Randolph. And he said, nobody knows anything. All we can come up with are hypotheses based on what we believe in the current situation, what we've lived in the past, and how do we test those hypotheses to see if they're true. So I can sit here and tell you my time, my career, my situation. It made a ton of sense for me to go into IBM and get that background. And then it didn't seem to make any sense after 11 years and, to go out and start my first company, but it actually did. And it worked out really well. But that's a personal journey for that time and place. I think everybody needs to look at it. And this is kind of what we do in our education, is we don't try to give, deterministic answers. We try to give people the right questions to ask, to think about how should you think about your situation? And ultimately, there are multiple paths to success, but you have to choose the one that you think is right and go on it. And then if it doesn't work, back up and come back to the next one. It's really a case of iterating, experimentation, and then integrating multiple signals, intentional and unintentional, and then deciding what your next step is.
And Bill, I want to go back to the reflection we heard yesterday from one of those students you'd mentioned in the session, where the question was, do I want to go be a quant? Do I want to be a software engineer? Or do I want to go start a business, right? And there's no necessarily right answer for everybody. There's no blanket advice there. It's, you've got to do what you're passionate about and what you want to spend your time doing and what makes sense for you. But the entrepreneurship you can always come back to later. It may not be the thing that you start with. You may be the most entrepreneurial quant or the most entrepreneurial software engineer, and you're going to have an outsized impact in the organization that you go into. But you may decide, for you, it was 11 years later, that down the road, you want to go start a business and you're going to be much better prepared to do so.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It doesn't mean that, to the point that if you come to our class, it's not wishy-washy. We're not just sitting around. We have first principles that we teach on how to make these decisions, but it's up to you to make those decisions. And an entrepreneur can exist in a startup as a founder, and they can exist in big organizations. They can exist in governments. They can exist in people's personal lives. And it's our belief that, everyone everyone is born an entrepreneur, and everybody must become an entrepreneur, because the world is changing so rapidly, and it's not going to slow down. So at the end of the day, we don't mean to be wishy-washy. You need to do something. Well, as we like to say, you need to get shit done. Do something. That's entrepreneurship. See?
I think there's an apostrophe missing on the ship there, but we won't go into that. So, entrepreneurship, I think know covers a very broad range of kinds of things that people could be doing. Let's talk about innovation. What's innovation-driven entrepreneurship, and how's that different?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Right, we think about all these different types of entrepreneurship. We think about how you could go do it in different settings, in corporate and academia, government or otherwise. But when we talk about innovation-driven entrepreneurship, what we're talking about is there's the book that Bill mentioned. By the way, I saw that question pop up in the chat, so there you go. That will never work. When we talk about innovation-driven entrepreneurship, we're talking about some new technology or product that is not just invented, it's commercialized, but it's also distributed. It's scalable. It's something that can have a global impact, right? We always talk about how you have to have real purpose and you have to be looking to make an impact on the world. It's not about distributing that product or offering it to customers in a localized region. It's about being able to do so globally at scale. Bill, is there anything you'd add in there?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the book, and we have this in our first, like anytime you want to, at the end of the day, MIT is an engineering school, and Paul and I are engineers. And the first rule of engineering is define your terms. Before you start to solve a problem, define your terms. And it's true for math, define your terms. What do you mean? And I think that we need to be clear about entrepreneurship is this broad term. What exactly do we mean? And then within that, there's different types of entrepreneurship. And there's what we call small, medium enterprise entrepreneurship. And that's where someone's building basically a service to provide for a local economy, which is great, a restaurant, a nail salon, an IT service company. But those businesses are basically service businesses that are difficult to scale. On the other hand, what we focus on here, not because it's better, but you need both, but because what we believe it's what we do well is innovation driven. And these are scalable businesses that take more time and effort to get going. And they have kind of a different taxonomy. They have different kind of fundamentals. While there's things that overlap between the two, they're different, but they're scalable. And when you get them right, they fundamentally change the world, and they change economies, and they solve massive problems. Whereas if you have a SME, by the name of it, small, medium enterprise, it's going to remain small. Now, again, that doesn't mean that many of you out here might be SMEs or your parents were SMEs. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a backbone for an economy. Those are geographically distributed, non-tradable jobs. But we need both. And what we focus on here, going back to it, is innovation-driven ones that will scale and be the gazelles that solve the major problems of the world.
And Bill, when we talk about it, we talk about the SMEs as having that linear growth path versus the IDEs, the innovation-driven entrepreneurial ventures, as having the exponential growth. And the real difference here is the amount of upfront investment that's required, which can be a challenge, but that's what allows you to develop something that really can be scalable.
Yep, exactly. It's a system that actually has more, to be technical here, it's a system that has more inertia because you have an innovation or product development debt that you need to create before you can see the results of it. And that means that the experiment that you run, there's a delay between the cause and the effect of it to see if it works. And that creates this valley of death that we talk about in our courses. And I talk about in my book, and I have a paper that we can put up there for people who are interested. And it's that dip that Paul's talking about at the beginning, which is the real challenge. How do you manage that valley of death to come out of it and to minimize it and to try to decrease the time and run experiments in it so you can actually avoid this time delay between when you try an experiment and see the results.
And that's when we come back to the systematic approach to improve the odds of success, right? It's what we do within that dip, much of which, we can talk about those first principles and the actions that the entrepreneurs can take.
Yeah.
So Alyssa in the chat asked a question.
Yeah. I'm looking at the chat, Peter. She said, what are the first principles? It's these 24 steps that we talk about that are laid out in this kind of systematic way, which is a sequential but not linear process, Anik. And I would just encourage you to go. That's what we teach. You can go out and see a whole bunch of stuff for free out there online. We have online classes. We put a lot of stuff out there. There's the Disciplined Entrepreneurship website. So, which I think raises the question, Peter, why would someone come to MIT to take it, right?
And
Sure.
Bill, that question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to amplify that point, Bill, and maybe before we dive into the executive education entrepreneurship course, you just started there, giving some examples of what are the materials and resources that are out there for people that would like to explore or know more about the work that you and Paul do here at MIT or the field more generally. You mentioned there are a variety of books, online resources, and other things like that. So I don't know if you could just maybe just do a quick review of that, and then we can sort of go to the question of, well, why would someone take an executive education course then?
Yeah, and I think let me just go through and kind of say the as-is state, and then I think we'll say what's going on right now, because Paul's doing some really interesting stuff, and that gets to the point of why would you do it live? I mean, I think this was published 10 years ago. It comes out of the class at MIT. It's called Disciplined Entrepreneurship. I'd never realized that, I'm an entrepreneur. And when they asked me to start teaching entrepreneurship, I went out, there's got to be a book that covers this stuff. And there was just all these little bits and pieces around, but nothing pulled it together. And that's what this is. So this is the book that kind of got it all started 10 years ago. And it to me, it was like, why would anybody be interested in this? And it just pulled together the best of Crossing the Chasm, Blue Ocean Strategy, or Lean Start, all these different things, and pulled it together as far as what works. So it was kind of like a consolidated, simplified model that didn't try to say, I know best. It's just like, here's how you pull all these things together. And then that took off like I never would have expected. Blew my mind. And then 5 years later, we did the update, which is this Disciplined Entrepreneurship Workbook, to take the concepts in here, the first principles, and make them more actionable. And then we also made an online course on edX called Entrepreneurship 101, which was followed by Entrepreneurship 102, and then 103, which was, at the time, I don't know whether it still is, was the most popular course for getting certificates on edX. And it just blew my mind. And in that process, I got to get lots of experience from, hear from people what worked and what didn't work. And we're continually trying to upgrade it. And what we try to do is take the theory, the rigor of, people here who are tenured faculty who look at this stuff with the relevance of a practitioner like myself to say, that's theory, but how do we bring that into practice? So rigor and relevance combined. And then we've had this really exciting movement over the past 4 years that Paul spearheaded to go from not just theory to practice, but now to tactics, to how you get it done. And that has been super exciting for me, and goes to the point how the field just keeps changing every day. I mean, I talked about Chat GPT. Again, if anybody hasn't done that, you need to go out and do it. But there's always new things that are happening. But those new things should not make you throw away everything else that ever happened. It's like medicine. We've got this body of knowledge about medicine, and then COVID comes along. Should we throw out everything we knew about medicine before? No, we should adapt it to the new facts that we know, the new circumstances. And Paul, if you can talk about what you've been doing in tactics, I think it's just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun too. When we think about it, we've got the theory, we've got the practice, the tactics. What does that even mean? One of the things that Bill, when we looked at it and we looked at the student journeys for how they learn entrepreneurship, they were understanding all of the strategy. They were getting how to build the business plan. But when we looked at it, there was a gap, and the gap was between taking the idea to a plan and actually going and getting the first 100 customers. There was a whole set of skills that were kind of missing, and people had questions, and we filled those gaps largely with workshops and office hours and things that we got repeated requests for from our students. And we said, okay, well, we know what these different skill sets are. And, Bill, we talk about founder-led sales a lot, right? It's like, oh, I need to go hire a salesperson. Okay, but can the founder sell it? The founder has to be able to sell the solution to a customer first. But when we think about it, in the early stages of any new entrepreneurial venture, the founder kind of has to be able to do everything. It's founder-led everything. founder-led recruiting. You're not going to have a chief people officer or an HR department on day one. You're probably not going to have an HR department for, until you get to 50, 100 employees. So the founder has to have a broad variety of skill sets. But one of the things that Nagarjuna Venna, who I teach the tactics class with here at MIT, says is, we need to teach people just enough to be dangerous in each of these different skill set areas. So that's what tactics is. It's the actions that we take as entrepreneurs to go and execute upon that business plan. And now we've taught it for quite some time. We're really excited about the revisions that we've made to the content, where we break it down and everything starts in market testing. How do we go run online ad campaigns in the most efficient way to get our first few customers and validate that people actually want this? How do we go put together an outbound sales campaign to get our first few customers? How do we build out the product roadmap for the initial product? How do we go and, this gets into the second module, product development. How do we do the UX design? How do we do the user testing? How do we build the initial prototype as the founder, not hiring a bunch of engineers, but going and doing it ourselves? And then the market testing and the product development really leads into resource acquisition, which is our goal. The question I hear most from students here is, I need to recruit a technical co-founder. I need to go raise $1 million pre-seed round, right? And if you can prove that the market wants what you have and you've delivered a very bare bones product to validate that, all of a sudden you should be able to go out and raise some money and hire some people. So we focus on fundraising, the actual actions you take in that process, and the actions you take to hire the first 10 people, writing the job description, going and sourcing candidates, going and having those first initial interviews. And we help people actually do it in the classroom setting, which I think we'll come back to in just a moment. But overall, it's developing these different skill sets for entrepreneurs so that they don't just have a business plan and then they're out wandering around in the dark. They know exactly how to complete these actions that entrepreneurs need to take. But it's not just completing the actions, right? It's not like we check the box. It's how do we do so in a resource-constrained environment? Because we can go teach sales, we can go teach advertising, we could go teach product development. But how do we do so at day one? How do we do so with limited time, limited money, with the goal of increasing both of those, increasing the amount of time and money we have through resource acquisition by raising money, hiring people? We have to prove that there is a business here first. And we heard the final presentations last night, two of the final presentations for our class. And I look at what those founders accomplished, and it blows my mind in just a semester how efficient they've been. And it's interesting, Peter. We had two final presentations, one from a PhD student here and one from a student in one of the executive programs. And it is fantastic to see how they took this idea and this business plan and went out and, now they've got a whole funnel. They've tested which value prop resonates best with real world people, with real world campaigns. They've A/B tested it. They know the value prop. They know their target customer is a biohacker. And they've got a list of people to get started with, a list of first customers. And that's what's really exciting for me. But this is evolving, right? It's evolving rapidly. And now we're starting to send that content out into the world for others to teach as well.
So the education, the learning that you're describing there seems like it's extremely extensive and presumably quite time consuming as well. And you mentioned constrained resources for entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs. Time is one of the most constrained resources. So, can you tell us how on earth do you put all of that into a week-long program in January?
That is a great question, Peter. And, it's actually interesting because in the last EDP, EDP is always changing. We're always evolving it, right? Right, Bill? And I think back to the last EDP and, what I just described, this tactics content. EDP is rooted in the practice, some of the theory, the tactics we've started to introduce. And I remember we did our first session in EDP on tactics in the last run of the program. And I remember afterwards, I was talking to some students. They're like, oh my gosh, I know how to do this now, right? I know how to actually go out and get those first customers to decrease the risks of going and starting a new business. It was fantastic, but we can't cover it all. We cover as much as we possibly can and set people up with all the follow-on resources. They get a good dose of it in EDP, the most comprehensive program. And, at that point, there's free work time baked into the program. Bill, what would you add?
Well, first of all, I want to add to the person who said, I don't think this is live. Yes, it is live. See, there's my thing right there. It's live. I can assure you we're live. And we see your questions. I think, yeah, with regard to resources, I mean, I think one of the biggest fallacies here, and I don't mean this in a false modesty way, I think one of the biggest fallacies people think is they're going to come and learn all this stuff from Paul and Bill. And in fact, that's a bit of a head fake. The most valuable resource that you get when you come to EDP is the community, because you as an entrepreneur, it's the pursuit of opportunities with resources beyond your control. You never have enough resources, so you have to get other resources. Do you know what the biggest value I think that people have when they come out of EDP is? They set up a WhatsApp group and they all help each other. And there's an old saying, the law of the jungle, the strength of the pack is in the wolf. Each wolf needs to be strong for the pack to be strong. And trust me, every person who comes to EDP is selected and they're good. And so each wolf is strong. But the second part of the strength of the law of the jungle is the strength of the wolf is in the pack. So it's an individual wolf doesn't get that much done, but if they're part of a pack, they can do amazing things. And so I think that when we have 1 week, we push people, we push them to the limit. How can we possibly start a company in 1 week? Each day there's a new thing that you need to deliver. How do what's your primary market research? You got to figure out who your customer is. What's your cost of customer acquisition? What's your product? And people are like, we can't do this. You know how they get it done? Because they have a team and they lean on each other. And the strength of the team allows them to get at least minimum viable product done. And then all of a sudden they build their confidence and they realize, boy, I don't have to do it all myself. I have this powerful community around me. And at the end of the week, Peter, the most, the whole thing's fun, but the most fun day is when they do their final presentations and people on Wednesday had been ready to kill each other. And on Friday, they're friends for life and they're hugging and they're crying that they have to go home. It's just, it's like, and it happens every year. It's really amazing. And that to me is, you push people to the limit and they realize what they can get done. And to Paul's point, they can't get it all done. We're not going to explain to you everything, but they build up the confidence to be able to then go back and use the reference books and everything else. And most of all, use each other to fill in the pieces they don't have. And again, this goes back to one of my fundamental things that, what is Newton's first law of motion. A body at rest will remain at rest. If you sit and think you've got to get the perfect recipe, the perfect idea, the perfect time, the perfect team, you will never go anywhere. A body at rest will remain at rest. A body in motion, once it's moving, will continue in motion. And at EDP, we get people moving in motion, they build up their confidence, and then they know where to go. That they're confident that even if they don't know it, they keep moving and they can get answers from different people. And that to me is the magic of what you can never do with just an online class, what you can never do with a book, which is why we get so excited about EDP. And we're so, people are like, oh my God, I'm exhausted after EDP. You know who else is exhausted? We're exhausted. People are like, you should do this like 4 or 5 times a year. It's like, no, we can't. It's exhausting. But it's like a boot camp,
Bill, it's so worth it. Oh my gosh. That it's like the long days. I think about how long it is. And I remember in the last EDP on the final day, we had the one team, there's judging and there was a team that won. And, I've never seen so many people who didn't win cheering for the people who won, because somebody came up to me afterwards and they looked at me and they said, I can't believe we just did that. I can't believe we just did that. I can't believe that on Sunday night when the program starts, we had nothing, no team, no idea, no anything. And they said, we have a potential business right now. Yeah. We if we want to keep doing this, we absolutely can. But I want to highlight that, we do have people who continue building their business in EDP. And Bill, I know we have a bunch of wonderful success stories. But I also think about those individuals. They go back into their organizations, and they're going back into their team, and they're figuring out, all right, what do we change? How do we reconfigure? How do we go and have a greater impact than we would otherwise? And they want to do it all in a week, which is that's the exciting part. But I'd also say people continue on that journey. I mean, Bill, I know we've got a few students here now, here at MIT full time. In our programs who started out, they got a taste of EDP. They said, "Oh my gosh, I want to do more of this."
Yeah, no, it's
so you just mentioned something there, which I was getting at. We've got a number of questions from people saying exactly that. I'm sitting in a large corporation, and I want to drive innovation and have these kinds of entrepreneurial behaviors, and how can we help with that? So what I was going to ask you was, who should come to something like EDP? But I imagine you would say, well, those folks would get a lot out of it, as well as the people who are really, kind of already started up businesses, to people who are thinking about starting up businesses. But could you say a bit more about, from your perspective, from your experience of running these, EDP for so many years? What's the ideal learner coming to EDP look like? Who should be thinking about coming?
Let me take a first crack at this, Paul. This is something I've really changed over the years, and I feel extremely passionate about now. When I first started, I thought our job was to produce founders of new companies. That was our job. I think that is way too limiting, and it's really not doing what we should do. We need entrepreneurs throughout society. And I know someone who works in a freaking large organization that is wildly dysfunctional, and that is me. I work at this organization called MIT, and if you think your organization is dysfunctional, imagine if you worked in an organization where they promoted you for your ability to argue, and if you argue really well, you get a job for life. Think about how complicated that would be, and then you try to get stuff done. And that's what I do now. And people are like, why do you do this? Because we can't solve the problems of the world just with venture-backed startups. What I do here today at MIT as an entrepreneur is I have a force multiplier effect that allows me to have much bigger impact. And so I think it's really important that we have entrepreneurs in all the levels of organizations. Is it easy in a big organization? The answer is no. And we have an entire course on this. We'll get into it at EDP some, but it's very refreshing to have a blank canvas. If somebody gives you a nice small blank canvas and you've got nothing on it, you can do it. But it's a small blank canvas and you have to go get all the paints and do everything. On the other hand, you could have this large canvas, but it's already got a whole bunch of painting on it, and it's got a rip on it, and you got to fix that rip. But if you do, you have this effect. And let me just say, I saw some of the comments in here. Look, the existential threat of our time, the entrepreneurial imperative, is climate. Let's be clear. I mean, we can start all the fintech companies we want, but if the earth is burning, it doesn't do much good. We are not going to solve climate with venture-backed startups. We need large organizations who have the balance sheet, the infrastructure to be able to solve this problem. And we desperately need entrepreneurs in those organizations, working with entrepreneurs in startups, working with entrepreneurs in government, working with entrepreneurs in academic institutions to solve this problem. And if we don't, shame on us. We're not doing our job. And if we think that, I believe that at MIT, it was the mission of MIT to solve the world's greatest challenges. If we don't do that, we should get a dereliction of duty, and you should fire me, Peter, and bring in somebody else. I know you want to do that anyway and bring Paul in, but this is for a better reason. But I think that this idea of intrapreneur, people say corporate entrepreneurship is an oxymoron. It cannot be. It does not have to be. It's just harder work. But as you said, Paul, before, there's no reward for an easy job. We've got to face these hard things. Ironically, we just had this moonshot here, and Earthshot, and it goes back to Kennedy's speech about the moonshot. We don't go to the moon because it's easy. We go there because it's hard. And these hard problems are what we need to be solving here. And I think everybody on this thing is it believes in that. We're not here to, I'll say this and then I'll be quiet. Delta V is our flagship program. We studied all the companies that came out of Delta V. Guess what? 89% of them were directly related to the UN sustainability goals. We're not into creating a profiteering thing that just makes money. That's not what we do. We create ethical companies that solve problems in the world. And, I'm sorry about this Samuel Bankman-Fried thing, but he never came to the Trust Center. And that's not what we teach. We teach ethical entrepreneurship, where you should be solving a real problem, not just making money. Profiteering is not what entrepreneurship is about. It's about problem solving. Sorry, so let me turn my proselytizing bit off here, Peter, and turn it over to Paul.
I didn't even see your height change when you stood on that soapbox there for a second.
Usually we have a hook to pull him off the stage whenever he's gone on too long. Yesterday, I started just passing for him in open discussion with the group. But Bill, I completely agree. Right? This is all on point. When we think about it, it is not just people who are going to go start a new business. You don't have to want to start a new business to learn the entrepreneurial process, whether we're talking about the theory, the practice, or the tactics. But what you need is a desire to have that impact with limited resources. If you're on this call and you have limited resources in the organization within which you work now, and you want to achieve more, we can help you. We can teach you the process to go through that. But one bucket that I'd also add to this, Bill, and I don't know how many folks here with us today are focused on this, but if not, certainly folks later, would be other folks who, want to teach entrepreneurship. I think we always have a group within EDP coming to learn the process so that they can take it back elsewhere, whether within a corporate environment, within startup accelerators, within other educational institutions. And they do it themselves. They do it themselves throughout the course of the week. And that always creates new opportunities. And Bill, I also think back to the Train the Trainers event that we just hosted. And, there's nothing better than learning the process, doing it yourself, and going from Sunday to Friday from absolutely nothing, clean slate, to fully baked business and presentation on Friday that you get an EDP.
Hey, by the way, Kamran Ahmed in Pakistan, you're bringing a tear of joy to my eye. I see your comment out there at 10:38. I love it. Sorry, Peter and Paul. That was a personal thing. He had participated in a workshop before. Love it, Kamran. All right.
That's great. Well, let's keep talking about impact, because people seem to be very interested in that, and I'm happy to see that. But I'd like to marry it with something else that I've heard you talk about, and you were touching on here, which is kind of like the culture and values around entrepreneurship as well. I mean, I think if we just read in the press, we see lots of examples of startups that have scaled and have become incredibly successful, particularly it seems like tech and innovation-driven ones, which it turns out have had a variety of sort of leadership and cultural issues, which in some cases have been their undoing. What's your take on that? And what's our role here at MIT? Your role in as educators, not just for our students, but out in the world, for really understanding what does great entrepreneurship and a great entrepreneur who's really contributing in all the ways that you've been describing, what do they really look like, and can we develop that, or is that just something which someone's born with?
Well, look, entrepreneurship is I started this off, I think is one of the most powerful forces the world's ever seen. And just like technology, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. And just to rewind a point that we didn't make at the beginning of this, which I want to make here, and then to lead up to the answer to your question, Peter, is all human beings are born entrepreneurs. It is. I dare someone to explain to me why human beings aren't born entrepreneurs, because it's simply Darwinian. They wouldn't have existed. If you go back to the days of Rome and Greece, no one was sitting in the streets dying of starvation saying, I got to get to the career development office to get a job, or I got to get onto LinkedIn to post my resume so I get a job in a big corporation. They just built stuff. They traded stuff. They provided services to people. Human beings had to be entrepreneurial to survive. It's only since the Industrial Revolution it's kind of been pulled out of them. And then the question is, well, can we teach that? And the answer is absolutely. We have plenty of data to do that. And if anybody wants to see it, we'll go through it. And you can see the success rate of people who go through our programs. People say, oh, to be an entrepreneur, it's unbelievably risky. Only 1% make it, maybe 2%. Let me tell you, almost 70% of the people who go through our program, who start a business, our full program at MIT, they are in business 5 years later. And the ones who aren't almost choose not to be in business, and they go on are even more successful because, as Paul said, their second pancake is better than their first pancake. So we can teach it. Now let's go to the point of that this thing that's this powerful force. And I want to just refer to this. If you look at the first thing, and this is kind of the disciplined entrepreneurship canvas, and it's sequential here. It's not just a fill in the blanks here. This isn't a Mad Lib exercise. The first thing here says raison d'etre, raison d'etre. And raison d'etre is French, as you well know, Peter, as an educated PhD. Raison d'etre means reason for existence. Why are you doing this? What is it? And someone mentioned in the thing, like, it sounds like you're creating a cult. Yes, that's actually true. When you're starting a company, you need to get people to believe in what you're doing. And I'm not talking about a bad cult where you drink Kool-Aid. I'm talking about a cult that says we're going to solve this problem. And why do I call it a cult? Because all you have is yourself and your efforts and your idea and your drive to do this. And you need to get other people to join you. And entrepreneurship is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. And so when you have those people and you realize individuals don't get nothing much done at all in the world, you need a team. You need to get people to join you for the reason that you're going to solve this problem, which is more than money, because a startup will never just go like this. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And the moment they're there for the profiteering and it's no longer as profitable as other alternatives and it starts going down, guess where they're going to go? They're going to go to Goldman Sachs. They're going to go to some other place. They're mercenaries. They're there for that. And when do you need your people the most? When it starts going down. Because if it starts going down and good people leave, you spiral downward and you never get out of it. So to have innovation-driven entrepreneurship, you need to have a mission that's more than making money. And I'm not just saying that from a moralistic standpoint. I'm saying great companies they're going to go through this up and down. And how do you keep people there? And that's what we teach. And people, well, that sounds like you're on a high horse someplace. It works. I'm telling you, it works. And I can go through all these examples of companies. If you have a raison d'etre, your team will stay with you. And if your team stays with you, your idea will always change. It will always be flawed. You're going to have to fix things with it. And the team will help you do that. Give me a great team with a mediocre idea, and they will beat the pants off a great idea with a mediocre team every day of the week and twice on Saturday and Sunday. Not even close. And how do you keep a great team? Not by money. You keep it by a mission. And this is more and more so true with young people today. And I'll point you to BioBot Analytics. Just go and look at BioBot Analytics. When I was working out this morning, I heard about, wastewater treatment has now identified polio in 3 towns in Massachusetts. You know who that is? That's BioBot Analytics. That's Mariana Mattis and Nusha Gailey, who came here and said, we want to produce a dashboard to improve health in cities. And people said, you need to go work in pharmaceuticals. You need to do this. And they stuck with what they wanted to do, and they didn't chase the money. And they have a freaking awesome company right now. And they're gonna make money. I'm not gonna apologize for it at all. They're gonna do really, really well. But they're doing what they love. They're doing what every day they get up, and the people who go work there love working there. And so that's what we're trying. That's what we're building. Paul, do you want to add to that?
I think you largely covered it. It's the people. It's not a solo sport. It's not just a group of people, but it's those people who are aligned. They're aligned on that mission. They're in it for the right reasons, and they're in it together. I don't know. You really covered that one.
Can we talk about what's going on right now, Peter?
Yeah, please.
So the first thing I want to say, and then Paul, you take Chat GPT. This thing is just mind blowing. In the past 24 months, it has become super clear to me. And this, by the way, goes back to, what we can't do in all these courses and books and everything, and even on blogs, is like things moving so fast that we're kind of developing it. The most interesting thing of all of entrepreneurship until last week when I saw, Chat GPT, right? Yeah. Is GPT is the change from product market fit is people are getting product market fit. You got to get it. But a lot of people now know how to do product market fit. And then now that's moving to channel market fit, which says, how do we go to market? We got a product, we know, but now how do you go effectively to that? And this question of go to market is really about how do you sell the product? How do you get customers to acquire the product? And the traditional way was get a salesperson, hire a salesperson and do it. This turns out to be quite wrong now. It's because even if it's right, it might be right for a time period, but then you've got to modify it. You need to build a revenue engine that is not only effective, but it's cost effective compared to your lifetime value. There's first principles here apply, but it also has to be scalable and anti-fragile in that when circumstances change. And so we have this class that we just had last night that's really, really exciting. And it's a thing we're talking about is when you think about sales, don't think about sales. Think about revenue. How do we generate revenue? And that could be through sales. It could be through marketing. It could be through product-led growth. It could be through channels. It could be through customer success. And so you have these multiple motions or dials that you have to build a revenue engine. And then how do you understand these dials? And as you build this, then when circumstances change, how do you adjust those dials? So sales is no longer stagnant. It is these multiple motions or dials that you have to design in from the company at the beginning. And you have to understand which one do you do. And I'll give an example of that in a second. And then you have to, let me just give the example now. One of my sons started a company and he did he did $45 million in the first year. And he came back like, oh, I can't believe it. How can you do $45 million? How many salespeople? He said, I have no salespeople. And I just like exploded. I was like, I would have been surprised if I just became a piece of burnt bacon there. And he said, we don't have any salespeople. And so what they had done is they had designed the organization to be able to sell things through using the product, using the community, using channel without having the direct salesperson. And then when COVID came, it had to change even more. And you have to have this dynamic system. Anyway, this is the type of thing that we're talking about. And I could go on and on about it. But this is an area where there's a tremendous amount of action right now is how do you build this revenue engine? How do you make it dynamic? And how do you use technology in it, which is going to be the bridge to Paul? Because if you think automating sales or revenue now, as we're elevating it to the next level, is using Salesforce.com, your competition is licking their chops because that's like 10 years ago or more. Like now you have to use AI to figure out where are the leads, what are the metrics, how is our cost, what's the engagement levels. You need to use AI in sales. And if you're not, it's like trying to play chess against a computer. You're never going to win. And because that computer is using data, they're using things that are just going to clean your clock. But enough from me. Paul, tell them about Chat JP.
I'm not going to jump there quite yet, but Bill, there's something here that's really important, right? You talk about it being dynamic and all these dials that you're going to turn as the business develops. And, when we think about it in tactics, that's one of the things that we call out immediately. Hey, here's some approaches to go and get your first few customers, but this is going to be, limited in time horizon, right? The tactics that you employ in the first few months are going to change. You're going to have to introduce more marketing and more sales. But then we have the follow-on in the entrepreneurial sales class, and that's really where everything ties back to these first principles that we touch on in EDP. And I think that's what's really, really exciting, is we can look at it throughout the development of the venture and how things change. How do we change those dials? What considerations are there? But you mentioned ChatGPT, and I told you I was working on it and tinkering until 1 a.m. last night. And the thing that was most interesting to me was that I could ask it a question about the entrepreneurial process and I could get a good answer. But the key, as I was exploring, was asking the right questions. It was asking the right questions, the right series of questions, to understand not just what first principles apply, what actions to take, but how to do it at different stages throughout the course of a venture's life cycle that it's not going to be able to tell you necessarily, unless, of course, you ask the right questions. And Bill, when I think about our roles as entrepreneurship educators and teaching individuals the first principles, some of the tactics, sales, we go into different functional areas and different industries. Our role, if that is going to shift in the years to come with the introduction of AI and technology and learning and development, is our role becomes defining what those questions are to ask and how we should be thinking about them and how we should be applying them, and really how that all fits together in the overall process, which is something that we spend a lot of time developing, working on, and iterating here at MIT at the Trust Center in collaboration with different schools around the world. When we put the process together, we test it, we iterate it, we get feedback on it, and it's the questions ultimately that are asked and presented, and how we tie it together. And I think that's the thing that, from an experiential learning perspective, we show people that this can be done through the right series of questions. But it's fascinating, and we're going to have to check back in on that as we see it continue to emerge.
But it's real time happening now, and this is a conversation we're having here about what is it going to transform. And the good thing is, like, we've seen this before. It's like when I grew up, and Peter, you grew up, we were taught, here's how you add things, here's how you multiply things. And that was like, how quickly can you add more? And then all of a sudden, computers did that better than people. And so then you have to raise the level of understanding of what do these numbers mean? How do you ask the right questions? And when you look at ChatGPT, that's Chat George Paul Thomas. And just of all, there's no financial incentive here for us for ChatGPT. It's open source, it's free. But you now have to rethink, how do you structure jobs? How do you do it? Because to Paul's point, we're trying to figure this out, but how do you get the right questions? Because now if you say, how do you determine cost of customer acquisition? Guess what? You can go put that in the ChatGPT and you can get a really good answer. The question is, what does that answer mean? And what's the next question? And when should you answer that question? But we don't know the answers yet. Like, this is real time figuring out how does a disruptive invention change the world, and how do we use that in a positive way? That's what entrepreneurs do. We don't create ChatGPT. We figure out how to use it.
So that reminds me of, to paraphrase something from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you know the answer, but what was the question?
That's exactly right, Peter. That's exactly right. And it's funny, our new course is actually called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the MIT Entrepreneurship Galaxy. It's something of a theme here.
Yeah, and that, by the way, this is what happens. Like, 1 year in EDP, the answer was drones. Whatever the question was, the answer was drones. And then 1 year, the answer was blockchain. And what was the question? Doesn't matter. The answer was blockchain. And we had to say, wait a second. First of all, what is blockchain? But anyway, the question is, when there's a new invention, and we teach the skill at a kind of I hate to use the word meta, but we teach it how to fish, how to, not just for one invention, not just for one problem, but how do you solve that problem using technology, business models, creative design thinking. I saw that in there. All those other tools in the toolbox for entrepreneurs. How do you do that to solve problems in a positive, impactful way that's economically sustainable? And it's fun as hell.
So that's how to be deliberate and systematic, and not just the coin toss, and person gets lucky with with some great idea.
Yeah, we're an engineering school. We don't, this idea that it just drives me crazy. Oh, entrepreneurship is gut feel. Bullshit. That's garbage. That's garbage. And I can show you a million examples of that. Or you're just born an entrepreneur. Garbage. Absolute garbage. There's a systematic, repeatable, scalable process that it's not an algorithm, but it dramatically improves your odds of success. And most of all, it improves your confidence. And if you improve your confidence, then we got you. You're gonna be someone who can change the world.
So speaking of scaling on that, just we're about to run out of time, but I was curious to hear your thoughts on sort of wrapping all of those things together. The entrepreneurs we often hear about, maybe are the real outliers and exceptions, but there are many, 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 many more people who are very successful entrepreneurs that most of us never hear about.
Yeah.
And so, are you trying to mint the ones that that are the unicorns that will become household names, or are we much more focused on sort of entrepreneurship for the rest of us?
So first of all, I think it's extremely damaging, like movies like Social Network and Steve Jobs and and Elon Musk and what they portray themselves as to what the reality is. Are they successful? I think you can't deny they're successful, but they can generate Elizabeth Holmes and they can generate other things which are not correct. And when you look at the whole body of work and you peel back what Steve Jobs did, what made him successful, it wasn't all the stuff that you see in the movies. It wasn't, it was some underlying fundamental principles of a team that's behind the scene. History is rewritten by winners. And those stories are really, really misleading. And we have the data at MIT to show you how to become a great entrepreneur without becoming like that. Paul, we'll give you the final word.
Yeah. It's not just about the people who are going to go create the biggest company, get in the headlines. It's about the people who are going to have the impact. And that's what the research that we've done, Bill, that you referenced earlier, the 10 years of the Delta V accelerator program that we run here at the Trust Center. When that research is conducted, it's looking not at, okay, what's the valuation, right? Of course, we look at that metric or how much money have they raised. We look at those things, but what we're looking at is, can we build individuals who will have impact time and time and time again, repeating the process, getting better every time. And the most interesting thing to me, Bill and Peter, is that when we look at those companies that have come through, or more importantly, the individuals, it's not just that they started the one company while they're here at MIT, it's that they've gone on to start over 100 companies afterwards, right? They've gone on to start more and more. They become more and more successful. And we look at the other metrics, revenue, money raised, those sorts of things. Those increase dramatically when you look at the follow-on companies because they're getting better.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that is you asked, who is this for? Let me tell you who this is not for, Peter. This is not for someone who wants to be a tech bro and do another dating app or cryptocurrency. That's not what we do. You want to see who it is? You go look up Mariana Matas comes from Mexico, comes to MIT, and Nusha Gali, who comes from Persia, Iran, through Canada, and they start a company. And they don't seek the limelight. They don't seek a movie. They just get the job done and they transform society. And they have a fabulous company where people just come to work every day and feel empowered. Just final note, data. We love data here. 55% of our CEOs in this past cohort were female. And that's because they deserved it. They were they were great leaders. Entrepreneurship is a team sport. It can be taught. And it's just like sports. Sublimating your ego is a good thing. I think we see some terrible examples of the opposite and think that that's what entrepreneurship is. It is not. And that's what we teach here. Thank you for having us, Peter. I hope we haven't sufficiently embarrassed you that we'll never get to talk to you on these things again, but we can do nothing but speak the truth. Our filter is gone. Entrepreneurs remove the filter.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Paul. This has been fantastic. There have been many, many comments on the LinkedIn Live field as well, which we will go through and may put some of those questions to you offline and see whether we can get some answers to some of those questions going as well. But this has been tremendous. We really appreciate the time that you spend with us. We really appreciate you. I think the message to anybody watching this is if you want to have impact, if you want to increase your impact, then check out the amazing resources that Bill Aulet and Paul Cheek and the team here at MIT have put together. And in particular, if you can come and spend a week with us in balmy January in Cambridge, Massachusetts, then in 1 week you can have the opportunity to get what takes other people's a year or maybe even 4 years to get. But that I think has to be seen to be believed. But I too can attest to the fact that Bill and Paul do achieve in that 1 week all the things that they talked about in the last hour. And as I think some of you saw in the comments, there are thousands of people who can validate and verify that as well, to speak of the data. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for joining us from all around the world. And we hope we'll see.
Maxwell's back tomorrow, Peter. Anne-Marie Maxwell's back, and she runs the whole thing. So thank goodness. That's a great Christmas present.
On that good news note, yes, welcome back, Anne-Marie Maxwell, and we'll see you all online, and hopefully we'll see some of you here at MIT in the new year.
Thanks,
Excellent.
everybody.
Thanks, Peter.
Have a great.